Okay, so welcome to episode 56 of History with James. Today we're going to talk about the second part about war atrocities. I don't have a particular name for it. World War I in Serbia and war atrocities. So again, if you'd like to get to our page, you go up to the corner of the iTunes page where the search is. You type in History with James. We'll go back for a second. And then you'll hit, let's see here, and then you hit this page, and then you go down, scroll down the page to the, let's see, to the podcast, the second one there, click on it, and you can download all the episodes. So this is, again, so now our format now is changed a little bit, because of the screen capture taking up too much room on the podcast page. The screen capture will be uploaded to the YouTube channel. Yeah, and I can pull that up, I guess, if I wanted to. So you can pull up the YouTube page. It's History with James. I don't know the exact. Let me see if I can pull it. Yeah, okay, we're already on that. So let's go to this thing here. They always change the format with YouTube, so it's hard to keep track of like stuff here. This is the page. Up at the top, you can see the full address there. What I'll do is I'll copy it into a document just so you can look at it really quickly. The address for the YouTube page. Okay. And there it is. If you want to pause the video, you can look at it. That's the so the YouTube page has the first episode of the screenshot up, and it's got about 22 views. So yeah, that's how it works. This is the previous half of, or the continuation of this episode. So this is 56. I believe. Let me just double check. So yeah, if you search it in iTunes though, and you want to listen to the audio, this is episode 56, and we'll try not to with this because I'm going to just straight convert the video into audio for the podcast. We'll try not to be like look at here or look at there, but I will say you can pull up a map here, and we'll actually have the map on the screenshot part of the episode. So the first part is Austria and its war with Serbia. In the mind of some in Austria-Hungary and then the Austria-Hungarian government, an unrestricted Serbia possessed a direct threat to the existence of a monarchy in Austria. So again, we'll go to our pictures here. We can go to this one because we already looked at it. Let's see. I have some pictures here from a book. These aren't the ones. The book is, let me see, I think it's the first one or the second one. It's the second one. This book here, we use this a lot. It's one of the books here, and it's a fantastic book, just because of the information provided in it. And I think you can see in this particular, if you pulled up a map between Austria-Hungary, let's see, Austria-Hungary, and trying to think of how to explain this. Between the Austro-Hungarian Empire and an Austro-Hungarian Empire map, a map of Serbia. Right? Okay, we'll pull up an image here, but this is if you want to do it on your own podcasting listening audience. Let's see, get a decent map here. Okay, we're pulling up a map here. Perhaps we can get it bigger. Not really. If you look at the map, and you look at the Austro-Hungarian Empire, you'll see Serbia actually borders Serbia here on the map, borders the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So in the mind of some in the Austro-Hungarian government, An unrestricted Serbia possessed a direct threat to the existence of a monarchy in Austria. And keep in mind, the Balkan Wars, which you talked about earlier, had significantly expanded Serbia, and also the Russo-Turkish War had expanded Serbia. So yet the government delayed decision in acting against Serbia. Remember we talked about this Archduke being assassinated. So they didn't directly go to war with Serbia. The Hungarian Prime Minister, the Hungarians being half the government, did not want war with Serbia. Part of that delay had to do with making sure Serbia had the backing of Germany. As we know, the Germans gave their full support, but the other had to do. Okay, so the other part of the delay had to do with the Hungarian government. The Prime Minister of Hungary was a Calvinist and against actions that would lead to war. More importantly, he did not want a war to acquire a new discontent minority, which the Hungarians already had within their section of rule. Okay, so if you look at Austria-Hungary today, let's just say we look at Hungary today, okay, or Austria-Hungary, or a map of today's Europe. We can do that really quickly. So if you wanted to pull that up, you could pull up a map of Europe. Okay, and actually there was a good image back there. Under the Austro-Hungarian, if you look it up in Google. I don't want to spend too much time on this. Let's try to go back. There was a great map and I missed it. Exit. There is a map. Okay, there's a map when you type in Austro-Hungarian Empire. One of them is called the Ethnicities of the Habsburg Empire. Let's see if this gets any bigger. And you can see a whole bunch. The map's not very clear, but you can sort of see different ethnicities within the empire. And of course, part of that had to do with the Hungarian section of the empire, which had many ethnic minorities. This wasn't quite the map I was looking for. There's another one. Let's see if I can find it. It's a great map. Okay, you can sort of see it on this particular map here that I'm showing you. You just look through and you'll see the different ethnicities, and a lot of those ethnicities, again, the Austrians and the Hungarians were pretty much equals within the empire, but everybody else who lived in the empire was sort of a lesser force. So if we typed in a map of Europe today, again, you can look this up if you're listening to the podcast, or if you're doing the YouTube channel, you can watch this on the episode. Also, while we're doing this, I can also mention that you can leave ratings and reviews. The one we do have right now is a pretty unfavorable review, but once you go onto the podcast page that I showed you how to get to, you go from details to ratings and reviews, and you can write a review on the podcast page, or you can just simply rate this podcast. Okay, so you can write a review. You know, it says right here, write a review under the customer review section, or under customer ratings, you can go and just click to rate how many stars. Okay, so back to Europe. If you look at Europe today, it's highly fragmented by national ethnic groups, meaning the nations are divided by ethnic groups mostly. There are a few exceptions. Belgium. That's really the largest one. It's Belgium, which is Wallons and Flemish speakers. So people who speak Dutch in Belgium are known as Flemish, and Wallons. These are people. Wallons are people who speak French, and that's Belgium. That's the only country that's not divided along ethnic lines. Okay, so we'll move on to the next part there. The Serbians also. Okay, so where are we at with this section here? Tizia gave into the war crowd, but only after an agreement that they would not annex Serbia. Okay, so again, Hungary's already got enough ethnic minorities under them that are discontent. They don't want more. So only after Austria agreed not to annex Serbia did the Hungarian half of the government agree to this. By the time the Council of Ministers agreed, though, 1 week had passed. When they did not act, it was a significant delay. Austrian invasion of Serbia. Austria-Hungary attacked Serbia with 400,000 men on August 12, 1914. They inflicted a great deal of damage, but could not defeat Serbia's army. The Serbians also had about 400,000 men, and they were well-armed veterans of the Balkan Wars. So the Serbians had a superior knowledge. Also, the Serbians had a superior knowledge of the country, and thus let the Austrians capture the lowlands, but controlled the high ground. And if we could look at a map of what is Serbia. Let's see if it pulls it up. Okay. The terrain you can see is very rocky in a lot of places. Try a different one. That's not a good one exactly. So you can look up a map of Serbia if you're listening to the podcast. Or you can just simply listen. We don't try to get too off subject. Yes, so Serbia has a significant amount of mountains that make travel very difficult. So, yeah. So, for example, like this picture here, these are the mountains, right? Right. So they let the Austrians capture the lowlands and but controlled the higher ground. When the Serbian defenders held their ground on August 17th, 16th and 16th and 17th, leading General Conrad von Holzendorf was forced to send reinforcements. So, in case you wanted to see a picture of Holzendorf, okay, we can show one. You can look one up also too. Holzendorf. Okay. He's sort of the main guy and inside Austria-Hungary, right? For some reason, the search isn't working so well. Okay, so he was forced to send reinforcements. Even with this, the Austrians were forced to withdraw. In November and December, the Austrians renewed their offensive, going so far as to capture the Serbian capital, but the Serbs pushed them out. By the end of 1914, both sides had lost thousands of soldiers. Even so, no one side gained an advantage. Okay, so basically, despite perhaps this isn't a very good map of that, is it? Oh, it's a better picture. This one here shows the divide between Bosnia, which is where Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Serbia, and the Serbian army. You can look it up too. And where the Austrian corps attempted to attack in August. Right, but then no one really gained an advantage. Yeah, that's funky, right? Okay, so then there's that. Right, so the Serbs pushed them out even with this big push and reinforcements, and so basically they had fought to a draw with large casualties. Having had recent success against the Russians, the Central Powers began to renew their attack on Serbia. And what you'll see here is a nice picture from the book that we're talking about here, A Mad Catastrophe. You can get it probably at a library somewhere near you. Let's see if we have that one there. Yeah, this is a picture here of captured Russian soldiers. And can we make it bigger? What does it pop out mean? Okay. Yeah, I think that means it gets bigger. Let me just check here. Yes. So this is a picture here that I'm showing of captured Russian soldiers. It says on this here, by November 1914, the Germans calculated that they and the Austrians had killed, wounded, or captured 1.25 million Russians in just 3 months of combats. So these are a lot of the prisoners here in the picture that we're showing. Just simply crazy that they were able to inflict such heavy casualties on the Russians. Bulgaria enters the war. We have already discussed in detail the tensions that developed in the Balkans as a result of the Balkans Wars. Again, remember, Bulgaria lost a heavy portion of what it had gained in the First Balkan Wars and the Second Balkan Wars by declaring war on Serbia and a few of the other powers. I think it was like Greece or something. So if you look at a map, this is Bulgaria. Of course, it borders Serbia. Right. So you can see that there. Okay? So the conflict left a bitter taste in the mouth of Bulgaria, who lost much of the conflict and made peace at a disadvantage. As historian Richard C. Hall wrote of the Bulgarian war effort, in the Second Balkan War, right, the Bulgarians. Sorry, let me read that again. As historian Richard C. Hall wrote of the Bulgarian war effort, in the Second Balkan War lost most of these gains to the Greeks, Serbs, and Ottomans, as well as other territory to the Romanians. After the war, Bulgaria no longer looked to Russia as a friend. So it not only caused tensions between Bulgaria and its neighbors, right? As you can see, bordered by Romania. If you looked at a map, Bulgaria is bordered by Romania, Greece, and Serbia, and also, well, not really Montenegro, but it's close in the region. And Russia had supported, like, the Bulgarians were very mad because, right, they had gotten, I'm trying to think of the words here. Basically, they're mad at Russia because of Russia's involvement here. In the Balkans Wars. Right. So Bulgaria no longer looks to Russia as a friend. Russia had largely not worked to settle the dispute between Serbia and Bulgaria over Macedonia, and thus led to the Second Balkan War. So Russia didn't play a mediator. Russia largely stayed out of it, and this helped Bulgaria to lose significant gains. Bulgaria could no longer be counted among the Russian allies. Despite the bad blood between Russia and Bulgaria and the bad relationship with Serbia, Bulgaria had no preference for either side of the conflict in World War I. Okay. The only requirement for an alliance was that the attainment of Bulgaria's national ambitions be served. So again, if you look to, the west of Macedonia, it's a place called, of Bulgaria, it's called Macedonia, and these are largely disputed territories. And this is really the chief among what their attainments want, are the national ambitions, and that's Macedonia. Macedonia also was a little bit larger than what's showed on this map. It also included parts of Greece as well. Today's Macedonia is its own country. It's separate. The country that you look to the west of Bulgaria is separate from the Greek region of northern Greece known as Macedonia. There's also a name dispute over Macedonia, right? So when the Olympics come around, Macedonia is known as the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia. Okay, that's what they're known as, the Olympics. Despite the strategic value of despite the strategic value of the Bulgarians in the Gallipoli campaign, Serbia would not deliver the price. Serbia would not deliver the price for the friendship to Bulgaria. Okay. So another thing you look at this map is you notice Bulgaria actually borders Turkey, and very close to where the Allies landed at the what we call the Turkish. Well, let's just look up Gallipoli. I misspelled it because I'm not really sure how to spell it. Let's see if this corrects me. I guess with this recorder, it's a little bit slower. Okay, let's go to the web. Sorry. Is that right? Okay. Sorry, it's taking so long. I just have to look at it. And Gallipoli was a massive campaign launched by the Allies. Let's see if this has it here. And then if you look up the map of Gallipoli, spelled Gallipoli, you'll see how close that Gallipoli campaign is to Bulgaria. But they weren't able to get, again, because of the bad blood between Serbia and Bulgaria, they weren't able to get the Bulgarians to agree to. The Allies couldn't get the Serbians to agree to what the Bulgarians wanted, so they weren't able to deliver on this. The Serbs were not willing to part with Macedonia, and thus Britain, France, and Russia could not deliver the cost of a Bulgarian ally. The Central Powers of Germany and Austria-Hungary were more enticing. The war looked in the favor of the Central Powers in 1915 on the Eastern Front. Again, if you look at the massive upsets against the Russians, 1.25 million in just 3 months. Killed, captured, or wounded. So, effectively taken off the battlefield. Germany had broke through the Eastern Front, and the Allies were slated. And the Allies were stalled on Gallipoli, which would become one of the greatest disasters of the war for Britain and France. Now we're showing you Gallipoli. The idea was to land at Gallipoli on this map here and go all the way to Constantinople. This simply did not happen. As Dr. Hall put it, quote, either Bulgaria could have part of Macedonia at the end of the war if it joined the Entente, which is Britain, France, and Russia, and of course Serbia and the lesser allies, or all of it immediately if it joined the Central Powers coalition. On September 6, 1915, Bulgaria joined the Central Powers. Further, the Bulgarian army began to mobilize their army on September 15th. Beginning of Serbian conflict in Greece. On October 1915, the Central Powers began an attack on two sides of Serbia. Okay, so if you look at where Austria-Hungary is on this map, they attacked from there and moved south into Serbia. And if you look at Bulgaria, moving from their side of the map there on Serbia. Okay, so we did that. We talked about that attack on all sides. In order to secure the defense of Serbia, who was isolated, the British and French landed troops in Greece, a neutral country. So again, if you look at Greece, you can see why they'd want to land troops in Greece, because of its proximity to Serbia and also Bulgaria. The Allies were to march to Serbia, Serbian Macedonia. Again, Macedonia is just south of Serbia, and is disputed area between Bulgaria and Serbia. Or they're supposed to march to Macedonia, Serbian Macedonia, to relieve the pressure against the Serbians. So essentially help with some of the pressure on the two-front war. However, the Bulgarian Second Army managed to halt the Entente Army and force them back into Greece. At the point of retreat, Bulgarian General Nikola Zhukov, let's see if we can pull up a picture of Zhukov, just because we have the ability to. Is it Nikola? Yeah, I think it is. Unless I misspelled his name. We'll go to the web. Okay. Images. So Nikola Zhukov. General Zhukov thought it best to launch an all-out attack on the Entente force. He would proclaim, quote, "We have committed our entire existence to this war. We have engaged in a bloody combat and have sustained enormous losses." The defeat of the Entente force was a threat not only to Macedonia but to Bulgaria itself. And so crushing the enemy was important. So he was a really brilliant military commander for the Bulgarians. And that's a picture of him right there. Right, so it's not only just a threat to the Bulgarian Macedonia, but to Bulgaria itself, right? The disputed territory we talked about is Macedonia. The Germans resisted this strategy because they feared fighting on Greek territory would change the attitude of the neutralist government. So again, they were neutral, but their leader, I think it was a king or a prince of some sort, some type of royalty, was sort of leaning towards the Allies. They didn't want to do anything to provoke them by attacking on Greek soil. Also, the Germans thought of it as a way to keep a notable number of French and British troops away from other areas like the Western Front. Now, what we have to understand within the context of the Entente, right? When you type in not news, maps. When you look up a map of the alliance system, it never mentions the lesser powers, and I don't know why this is on maps. It should have been on images. I probably typed it in wrong. Here we go, images. Okay, so what we're looking at, and you can discount Italy from this picture if you're looking at it or if you're listening. Really, what you notice is there's really the main people in the alliance, and there's lesser alliances. Obviously, Serbia and Bulgaria are lesser allies, and therefore the strategy is really about the bigger powers facing the bigger powers. So everything, even if it benefited a lesser power, had to concur with the bigger power's objectives. If that makes sense. The question also arose, if the Bulgarians achieved their goal, would they really even continue to fight? Again, lesser power versus bigger powers goals. If they actually achieved their Macedonian land that they wanted, would they continue to fight for the Germans and the Austro-Hungarians and the Ottomans? The answer is probably no, so they're probably right in that sense. The Greek front would remain a constant front of the war and weaken Bulgaria. So Bulgaria was significantly weakened by this particular move here. Serbia overwhelmed. Meanwhile, the offensive in Serbia began in 1915. And let's see if we can pull up a reliable source. Okay, I'm just trying to see if I could find images. I don't know why that's on more. So these are advancing Austrian troops here. Okay, so meanwhile, the offensive in Serbia began, right? Bulgarian forces attacked Serbia from the east. Right, so we mentioned Serbia overwhelmed. Meanwhile, the offensive in Serbia began in October 1915. Bulgarian forces attacked Serbia from the east, while German and Austrian troops descended from the north. While the Allies did send help to the Serbians, as we discussed, they were pinned down in northern Greece and Macedonia. The Serbians, who had already suffered major casualties against the Austrians in 1914, retreated across the mountain range to be evacuated by fleets to Italy and the island of Corfu. Also, they fought in the mountains of Albania as well. If you know anything about Albania, it's similar terrain to Serbia. And these right here, if I'm showing a picture, you can look them up here. This is from the book. Serbs rarely surrendered. Those who did, like these men, were found to be in deplorable condition, poorly armed and equipped, some with as few as 4 days of military instruction. If you look at them, they're pretty tattered. This could have been from the time period where they were overwhelmed. It's not entirely sure, but again, when they were overwhelmed, when Serbia was overwhelmed, they fled to the mountains or they were evacuated by the Allies to sea. Okay, so these are important things here. The Serbian government was overwhelmed and effectively cut from the war. War atrocities in Serbia. Yale University professor of history John Merriman notes atrocities were very much part of World War I, and I have pictures of them, and I know they're brutal, but they are important for the study. This right here is in Austrian Army in Galicia, Hung people. Can we zoom in? I know it's very brutal, but these people were hanged for allegedly helping the Russians in Galicia. Galicia is mostly modern part. You can see the Austrian soldiers standing next to the corpses. It's mostly in what is today known as Poland and Ukraine. And these people were hung for allegedly helping Russian soldiers, I believe they were talking about here. Says the caption reads, Ukrainian civilians hung by the Austrian army in Galicia. Yeah, so that's where that's from. And I know they're brutal pictures, but they're part of the historical account. Merriman notes that most atrocities were carried out by the Germans against the Belgians. The Germans gunned down 5,500 Belgian civilians. The Germans were not alone in Merriman's assessment. He cited atrocities by Russians who carried out atrocities in what is modern-day Ukraine and Poland today. The hanging was also in the same region of Galicia. And I'm trying to remember what the other one was called. I can't remember. But so atrocities on both sides carried out in Galicia. Our focus, however, is the Serbian front, in which Merriman notes that the Austrians were told that the Serbians were subhuman, and thus this mindset carried out atrocities against Serbs. It should be noted, and we may get into this in a further episode, that this whole attitude did not apply to just Serbians alone, but the Germans had historic feelings about Slavic people. Again, we showed a map on the last episode. You can look it up too. Slavic people, when you look at these countries in Eastern Europe, they were considered sometimes barbarians, racial inferiors, and so forth and so on. It should be noted the Serbians committed atrocities in the Balkan Wars, which all sides did in both those wars. places where, even after the fighting stopped, in places like, again, Serbian Macedonia and Bulgarian Macedonia, there was sort of these rolling militias carrying out atrocities. In the case of during World War One, and in the interest of full disclosure, I was unable to pinpoint a rampant culture of atrocities of the Serbian military. Again, I did show you pictures of Serbian soldiers being captured. I'm not sure that they were really focused on carrying out atrocities, and really, I'm showing the picture again, because I'm not sure that they had, they simply were very desperate fighting for their survival. I'm not sure they had time to commit atrocities. And they wouldn't have done so probably against their own people, weakening their own support, because they were largely fighting in their own territory. Right. This does not mean civilian casualties did not, the Serbian military did not engage in targeting of civilians. As historian John Merrimatter noted, at least Austria-Hungary, Germany, and the Russians carried out atrocities. So I'm saying maybe the Serbians did, but we don't have a huge narrative like we did and these other powers did. Even before the Austrian military crossed the Serbian border, top military brass um, told its troops of the Fifth Army, quote, "The beating and imprisoning of innocent Austrian civilians must stop. The KUK army must inspire fear and respect, but must be chivalrous and must not descend into evil and inhumane acts." So again, even before they crossed the border from Bosnia into Serbia, we already have these cases of a uninformed army. And so that leads us into our next point, R.A. Rice report. So you're looking at the actual document itself. It's on my computer. The discipline of the Austrian army was already in question before the army crossed the border. One man would do much to investigate the atrocities carried out in Serbia, in a work titled How Austria-Hungary Waged War in Serbia, a personal investigation by a neutral, by R.A. Rice, professor of the University of Lausanne, which is in Switzerland. R.A. Rice is a criminologist, was a criminologist who was invited by the Serbian government to visit Serbia. He states that he was invited to quote, see with my own eyes and form a judgment upon the conduct of the Austro-Hungarian troops in that unhappy country. I'll take you down to that section. This is the person who translated it, listing a bunch of people. Here's the actual report, table of contents. Again, was invited by the Serbian government to visit, to see with my own eyes and form a judgment upon the conduct of the Austro-Hungarian troops in an unhappy country, what I just cited. R.A. Rice notes that he did not at first believe the complaints by the Serbians, but agreed to go anyways. Okay, so he notes that, and that's this. Oh, I went too far. Sorry. Okay, however, when I received the invitation of the Serbian government, I did not believe it my duty to accept it. It is not the duty of an honest man, if cruelties have really been committed, emphatically to denounce them, and only isolate cases of atrocity have occurred, to point out that a whole army cannot be made responsible for the misdeeds of a few hooligans, such as found among all nations. So again, a little like a skeptic when he first entered the country. Of his investigation, Rice wrote, "I did not limit myself to interrogating hundreds of Austrian prisoners and hundreds of eyewitnesses. I went to the spot, sometimes with shells bursting around me, to inform myself of everything that it was possible to investigate. I opened graves, I examined the dead and wounded, I visited bombarded towns, I went into houses, and I carried on the scientific inquiry using the most scrupulous methods. The statement provides us with information that Ari Rice was not trying to be partisan. In fact, he was a skeptical outsider who hoped to be careful in his findings. Again, we already showed you that excerpt here, right? So that's the part about being a skeptic. Thus, the credibility of the man as a criminologist and outsider can be trusted. One of the first things he brings to our attention is the use of illegal bullets used by the Austrian military. And in this report, there's plenty of images of things. So you'll see here explosive bullets, and it says plate 1. Magazines filled with cartridges containing explosive bullets, colors like the same. Bullets with exploding capabilities, right? So exploding bullets are bullets with explosive capabilities. Serbian soldiers stated that 2 explosions were heard when the enemy fired their rifles. Okay, while providing numerous pieces of evidence of the use of exploding bullets, RA concludes of the rounds, quote, there is therefore no doubt that these explosive Austrian bullets were used against Serbian soldiers. The number of persons so wounded proves that their use was very frequent. Again, the bullet, it's sort of a diagram of how they work. Right, markings, how the bullets fall apart, fragments, these types of things. And then we can go down a little bit further, and we see, wow, this is kind of disturbing, but it's worth looking at. Again, this is from a exploding bullet injury. Again, a bullet wound from an explosive bullet, a mushroom instead of a clear-cut bullet wound. Then he goes on, there's further. He cites a surgeon major of the Austrian military who says 117 cases of wounded were due to explosive bullets at the 6th Reserve Hospital. Okay, so that's another piece of evidence admitted. The criminologist informs the readers of the illegal nature of these bullets according to the, quote, rules of the war and international conventions. This in itself is a violation of the rules of war by Austria. Not only does he provide pictures of the wounds, which we already showed you, but you can look these up too. If you wanted to look up, you could type in probably Serbian explosive bullet wounds or R.A. Rice report, and you'll probably get the same type of images. Right. Not only does he provide pictures of the wounds, but the ammunition itself in interviews, captures. We already showed you some of the casings and shells he provided, which Austrians. Not only does he provide pictures of the wounds, but the ammunition itself, which we went over, and interviews captured Austrian-Hungarian soldiers, which allowed him to provide further evidence. While I could go on and explain the other atrocities in detail, I will simply provide some of the highlighted sections on the subject so that I may move on to other sources. R.A. Rice, professor at the University of Lausanne, also details the shelling of illegal targets by the Austrians, including the university in Belgrade, the National Museum, and the hospital, also located in the Serbian capital, Belgrade. Rice notes that the bombardment of these buildings violates the Hague Convention, of which the Austria-Hungarian Empire was a signer. Among much, and these are just more images of the shells here, among much of the leadership, the Austrians were committed to the destruction of Serbia as a political power. And as this report indicates, the Austro-Hungarians were committed to doing this in total disregard of the rules of law. Yale University professor John Merriman talked of Austrian soldiers being told Serbians were subhuman, which must have provided racial hatred of Serbians and disregard of them as humans. So again, we see, we've already explained some of that. We expanded a little bit on that by saying that Germans had a very racial component of how they viewed their neighbors, Russians and Slavic peoples. Right. Rice noted that not only were killings of Serbian POWs common, but also massacres of civilians, which he kept statistics on. If I want to pull up the image, this part's not necessary anymore. Let's see. I think what you're looking at here is the execution. The caption reads of the picture I'm showing here: Austrian troops shoot Serbian villagers. This is right, and you can see the picture of Serbian civilians being shot by Austrian soldiers. Again, part of the atrocities that Aria Rice notates and is in the book that we were talking about earlier. What's that one called? Yeah, the book that I discussed earlier with you. These pictures, all the pictures I'm showing you, are from the book itself. Okay. Right, so not only did they shoot Serbian POWs, common, but also massacres of civilians, which he kept statistics on. This will be on the extent we go on to Rice's assessment, but I will leave you with this showing the academic credibility of Rice. So another person who wrote about him in the Slavic Journal of Military Studies, Bastian Mateo Siana of Columbia University described Rice's work, saying his, quote, reporting on atrocities during World War I in Serbia contributed to the public perception of the role of civilians and the meaning of war crimes. This statement by a peer-reviewed article gives credence to the evidence provided by Rice as an authentic source. Atrocities by other sources, according to historian Geoffrey Wawro, the author of this book that we're talking about here. What's that one called? I don't like showing pictures of atrocities, but they're a mad catastrophe. Geoffrey Wawro. The Austrians were particularly brutal in their handling of the Balkans since 1878. In fact, the man that would lead the Austro-Hungarian forces into Serbia, Oskar Potirek, once stated, "The best method against the Komotajis is to kill them all. No quarter. Kill the whole bard, down to the last man. Then wipe out the village that harbored them and publicize the event widely." And so he was seen as this, very important general. And this is Potirek here. Picture of him from the book, Mad Catastrophe by Geoffrey Wawro. In fact, when the Austro-Hungarian forces crossed the border into Serbia, this was an action that occurred. In Sabok, early on in the war, I think it might be Sabok. Sabok, early on in the war, Austrian troops slaughtered an entire village. Again, we can point to a particular, let's see here, this picture here of Serbian villagers being executed. Sabok would play the host of many atrocities against non-combatants and combatants alike. In the case of combatants, they were usually the case of wounded soldiers killed by the enemy. So the case of wounded Serbian soldiers killed by the enemy. The Sixth Army of the Austrian forces, as it advanced through the mountains of Serbia, and frustrated by the lack of progress, took to, according to historian Geoffrey Wawro, burning Serbian huts, plundering, stealing livestock, picking fields bare, and shooting hostages to cow the local population. Meanwhile, behind the lines of fighting, scared of guerrilla-style warfare by the Serbians. The soldiers in Makua slaughtered civilians. As one Austrian general stated to troops in the mountain atrocities, this is conduct unbecoming of a civilized army. Yet his troops did not listen, and it took many other. Yet the troops did not listen, and it looks like many others didn't as well. Yet it is unclear whether or how many officers restrained their troops, giving support to Merriman's subhuman propaganda subhuman propaganda by Austria is the particular orders that many Austrian soldiers received. According to R. Rice, an order went out to the regiment to kill and burn everybody and everything met within the course of the campaign, and to destroy everything Serbian, and name specifically that the officers of the officers of the 26th Regiment. Rice names a particular commander and captain from the 26th Regiment. I think we will have a hard time answering if there was an overall restraint, but certain commanders who led atrocities, or as some have stated, an uncoordinated multi-ethnic army where uniformity was hardly present. But what we can say is that they did occur. The leaders of the Austro-Hungarian Empire had a warped sense of the conflict, as the Journal of Slavic Military Studies stated, where civilians took up arms to defend themselves and turned into semi-combatants. This played into the Austrians' mindset of facing a generally rebellious population and providing new grounds for slaughter narratives of mutilated corpses and treachery. So their understanding of the conflict, where civilians took up arms to defend themselves and turned into semi-combatants, this played into the Austrians' mindset of facing a generally rebellious population, providing a new ground for slaughter narratives of mutilated corpses and treachery. So again, they had this view of this populace, sort of being semi-combatants, taking up arms and from behind the Austrian lines and killing them. This is what they had the view that was happening. This certainly was probably not true. This most certainly played into how the Austrians treated POWs and the civilians they encountered. So they had this view that the whole populace would rise up against the Austrians, and therefore they had to be slaughtered. Conclusion. The Serbian front is often a forgotten chapter of the war. What started as a limited conflict between Serbia and Austria and drifted into a full-fledged war. What started as a limited conflict between Serbia and Austria drifted into a full-fledged war. Thus, attention shifted away from the region, as Dr. Remack notes, and to the major powers in the Western Front. What do we miss by turning our attention? We miss a bloody stalemate and display of a collapsing power in Austria. We miss a brutal use of atrocities that can be linked to other atrocities and strengthen that evidence. Finally, we miss the level of tension in the Balkans that arguably carried over from the Balkan Wars and involved much of the region. For the Triple Entente, Russia and Serbia. For the Central Powers, Austria and Bulgaria. It's also important to know a lot of these atrocities and tensions highlighted from the Balkans Wars before this war continue to this day. And anyway, signing off, and this is James signing off and saying,